Life in the 1800s was hard, brutally hard, and all too short. Most people were born to working-class parents, families that struggled to earn money to put bread on the table to feed families of several children. Pay was poor, and working conditions often poorer still. But people worked long hours in dangerous conditions because there was simply no other choice. This was a time when your choices in life were few. Work to eat and pay the rent on your miserably overcrowded lodgings, go into the workhouse as a pauper, or starve on the streets. Most worked, but this was a very different world to today. There were few restrictions on employers paying terrible wages for long hours of toil in sweatshops. Worse still, conditions were simply terrible. Today, you will hear a genuine account of the precariousness of life, told by Jack London, an American journalist and social activist. He travelled through the East End at the turn of the 20th century, disguised in a working man's clothes, so he could experience the struggles of everyday people for himself. You will discover how poverty was another face of death, for there were streets in London where, out of every 100 children born in a year, 50 would die during the next year from hunger, unsanitary living conditions, or disease. People worked hard, on wages so low they often lived on the edge of starvation. And on top of this, many worked in dangerous trades in a time before health and safety regulation. Find out how exposure to hazardous materials like lead caused all sorts of damage to the body, which could eventually result in death. Doctors at the time knew that bluish-black gums and teeth meant chronic poisoning, but the damage was already done. Before we move on, if you're interested in history like this, and you want to find out more about what life was really like for people in the past, please consider subscribing for more content. If you'd like to support what we make for you, check out the description for links to ways you can help us to continue bringing the past alive. I was talking with a very vindictive man. In his opinion, his wife had wronged him and the law had wronged him. The merits and morals of the case are immaterial. The meat of the matter is that she had obtained a separation, and he was compelled to pay 10 shillings each week for the support of her and the 5 children. "But look you," said he to me, "what'll happen to her if I don't pay up the 10 shillings? Supposing an accident happens to me, so I can't work. Supposing I get a rupture, or the rheumatics, or the cholera. What's she going to do, eh? What's she going to do?" He shook his head sadly. "No hope for her. The best she can do is the workhouse. And that's hell. And if she don't go to the workhouse, it'll be worse hell. Come along with me and I'll show you women sleeping in a passage, a dozen of them, and I'll show you worse, what she'll come to if anything happens to me and the 10 shillings. The certitude of this man's forecast is worthy of consideration. He knew conditions sufficiently to know the precariousness of his wife's grasp on food and shelter. For her, the game was up when his working capacity was impaired or destroyed. And when this state of affairs is looked at in its larger aspect, the same will be found true of hundreds of thousands and even millions of men and women living amicably together and cooperating in the pursuit of food and shelter. The figures are appalling. 1,800,000 people in London live on the poverty line and below it, and another 1 million live with 1 week's wages between them and pauperism. In all England and Wales, 18% of the whole population are driven to the parish for relief, and in London, according to the statistics of London County Council, 21% of the whole population are driven to the parish for relief. Between being driven to the parish for relief and being an out-and-out pauper, there is a great difference. Yet London supports 123,000 paupers, quite a city of folk in themselves. 1 in every 4 in London dies on public charity, while 939 out of every 1,000 in the United Kingdom die in poverty. 8 million simply struggle on the ragged edge of starvation, and 20 million more are not comfortable in the simple and clean sense of the word. It is interesting to go into more detail concerning the London people who die on charity. In 1886 and up to 1893, the percentage of pauperism to population was less in London than in all England. But since 1893, and for every succeeding year, the percentage of pauperism to population has been greater in London than in all England. Yet, from the Registrar General's report for 1886, the following figures are taken. Out of 81,951 deaths in London, 1884, in workhouses, 999, in hospitals, 6,559, in lunatic asylums, 278, total in public refuges, 16,746. Commenting on these figures, a Fabian writer says, "Considering that comparatively few of these are children, it is probable that 1 in every 3 London adults will be driven into one of these refuges to die, and the proportion in the case of the manual labour class must be, of course, still larger." These figures serve somewhat to indicate the proximity of the average worker to pauperism. Various things make pauperism. An advertisement, for instance, such as this, appearing in yesterday's morning paper: "Clerk wanted, with knowledge of shorthand, typewriting and invoicing. Wages 10 shillings, $2.50. A week. Apply by letter," etc. And in today's paper I read of a clerk 35 years of age and an inmate of a London workhouse brought before a magistrate for non-performance of task. He claimed that he had done his various tasks since he had been an inmate, but when the master set him to breaking stones, his hands blistered, and he could not finish the task. He had never been used to an implement heavier than a pen, he said. The magistrate sentenced him and his blistered hands to 7 days' hard labour. Old age, of course, makes pauperism. And then there is an accident, the thing happening, the death or disablement of the husband, father and breadwinner. Here is a man with a wife and 3 children, living on a ticklish security of 20 shillings, $5, per week, and there are hundreds of thousands of such families in London. Perforce, to even half exist, they must live up to the last penny of it, so that a week's wages, $5, is all that stands between this family and pauperism or starvation. The thing happens, the father is struck down, and what then? A mother with 3 children can do little or nothing. Either she must hand her children over to society as juvenile paupers, in order to be free to do something adequate for herself, or she must go to the sweatshops for work, which she can perform in the vile den possible to her reduced income. But with the sweatshops, married women who eke out their husbands' earnings, and single women who have but themselves miserably to support, determine the scale of wages. And this scale of wages, so determined, is so low that the mother and her 3 children can live only in positive beastliness and semi-starvation, till decay and death end their suffering. To show that this mother, with her 3 children to support, cannot compete in the sweating industries, I instance from the current newspaper the 2 following cases. A father indignantly writes that his daughter and a girl companion receive 17 cents per gross for making boxes. They made each day 4 gross. Their expenses were 16 cents for car fare, transport, 4 cents for stamps, 5 cents for glue, and 2 cents for string, so that all they earned between them was 42 cents, or a daily average each of 21 cents. In the second case, before the Luton Guardians a few days ago, an old woman of 72 appeared, asking for relief. She was a straw hat maker, but had been compelled to give up the work owing to the price she obtained for them, namely 4.5 cents each. For that price, she had to provide plait trimmings and make and finish the hats. Yet, this mother and her 3 children we are considering have done no wrong that should be so punished. They have not sinned. The thing happened. That is all. The husband, father, and breadwinner was struck down. There is no guarding against it. It is fortuitous. A family stands so many chances of escaping the bottom of the abyss, and so many chances of falling plump down to it. The chances reducible to cold, pitiless figures, and a few of these figures will not be out of place. Sir A. Forwood calculates that 1 of every 1,400 workmen is killed annually. 1 of every 2,500 workmen is totally disabled. 1 of every 300 workmen is permanently partially disabled. 1 of every 8 workmen is temporarily disabled 3 or 4 weeks. But these are only the accidents of industry. The high mortality of the people who live in the slum plays a terrible part. The average age at death among the people of the West End is 55 years. The average age at death among the people of the East End is 30 years. That is to say, the person in the West End has twice the chance for life that the person has in the East End. Talk of war! The mortality in South Africa and the Philippines fades away to insignificance. Here, in the heart of peace, is where the blood is being shed. And here not even the civilized rules of warfare obtain. For the women and children and babes in the arms are killed just as ferociously as the men are killed. War, in England, every year 500,000 men, women and children engaged in the various industries are killed and disabled, or are injured to disablement by disease. In the West End, 18% of the children die before 5 years of age. In the East End, 55% of the children die before 5 years of age. And there are streets in London where, out of every 100 children born in a year, 50 die during the next year. And of the 50 that remain, 25 die before they are 5 years old. Slaughter! That industry causes greater havoc with human life than battle. Can no better substantiation be given than the following extract from a recent report of the Liverpool medical officer, which is not applicable to Liverpool alone. In many instances, little if any sunlight could get to the courts, and the atmosphere within the dwellings was always foul, owing largely to the saturated condition of the walls and ceilings, which for so many years had absorbed the exhalations of the occupants into their porous material. Singular testimony to the absence of sunlight in these courts was furnished by the action of the Parks and Gardens Committee, who decided to brighten the homes of the poorest class by gifts of growing flowers and window boxes. But these gifts could not be made in courts such as these, as flowers and plants were susceptible to the unwholesome surroundings and would not live. George Hall has compiled the following table on the 3 St. George's parishes, London parishes. St. George's West, 10% of population overcrowded, death rate per 1,000, 13.2. St. George's South, 35% of population overcrowded, death rate per 1,000, 23.7. St. George's East, 40% of population overcrowded, death rate per 1,000, 26.4. Then there are the dangerous trades, in which countless workers are employed. Their hold on life is indeed precarious, far, far more precarious than the hold of the 20th century soldier on life. In the linen trade, in the preparation of the flax, wet feet and wet clothes cause an unusual amount of bronchitis, pneumonia, and severe rheumatism, while in the carding and spinning departments, the fine dust produces lung disease in the majority of cases, and the woman who starts carding at 17 or 18 begins to break up and go to pieces at 30. The chemical labourers, picked from the strongest and most splendidly built men to be found, live, on an average, less than 48 years. Says Dr. Arledge of the potter's trade, potter's dust does not kill suddenly, but settles, year after year, a little more firmly into the lungs, until at length a case of plaster is formed. Breathing becomes more and more difficult and depressed, and finally ceases. Steel dust, stone dust, clay dust, alkali dust, fluff dust, fibre dust, all these things kill, and they are more deadly than machine guns and pom-poms. Worst of all is the lead dust in the white lead trades. Here is a description of the typical dissolution of a young, healthy, well-developed girl who goes to work in a white lead factory. Here, after a varying degree of exposure, she becomes anemic. It may be that her gums show a very faint blue line, or perchance her teeth and gums are perfectly sound, and no blue line is discernible. Coincidentally, with the anemia, she has been getting thinner, but so gradually as scarcely to impress itself upon her or her friends. Sickness, however, ensues, and headaches, growing in intensity, are developed. These are frequently attended by obscuration of vision or temporary blindness. Such a girl passes into what appears to her friends and medical adviser as ordinary hysteria. This gradually deepens without warning until she is suddenly seized with a convulsion, beginning in one half of the face, then involving the arm, next the leg of the same side of the body, until the convulsion, violent and purely epileptic form in character, becomes universal. This is attended by loss of consciousness, out of which she passes into a series of convulsions, gradually increasing in severity, in one of which she dies, or consciousness, partial or perfect, is regained. Either it may be for a few minutes, a few hours, or days, during which violent headache is complained of, or she is delirious and excited, as in acute mania, or dull and sullen, as in melancholia, and requires to be roused, when she is found wandering, and her speech is somewhat imperfect, without further warning, save that the pulse, which has become soft with nearly the normal number of beats, all at once becomes low and hard. She is suddenly seized with another convulsion, in which she dies, or passes into a state of coma from which she never rallies. In another case, the convulsions will gradually subside, the headache disappears, and the patient recovers, only to find that she has completely lost her eyesight, a loss that may be temporary or permanent. And here are a few specific cases of white lead poisoning. Charlotte Rafferty, a fine, well-grown young woman with a splendid constitution, who had never had a day's illness in her life, became a white lead worker. Convulsions seized her at the foot of the ladder in the works. Dr. Oliver examined her, found the blue line along her gums, which shows that the system is under the influence of the lead. He knew that the convulsions would shortly return. They did so, and she died. Mary Ann Toller, a girl of 17, who had never had a fit in her life, 3 times became ill and had to leave off work in the factory. Before she was 19, she showed symptoms of lead poisoning, had fits, froth at the mouth, and died. Mary A., an unusually vigorous woman, was able to work in the lead factory for 20 years, having colic only once during that time. Her 8 children all died in early infancy from convulsions. One morning, while brushing her hair, this woman suddenly lost all power in both her wrists. Eliza H., aged 25, after 5 months at Leadworks, was seized with colic. She entered another factory, after being refused by the first one, and worked on uninterruptedly for 2 years. Then the former symptoms returned. She was seized with convulsions and died in 2 days of acute lead poisoning. Mr. Vaughan Nash, speaking of the unborn generation, says, "The children of the white lead worker enter the world, as a rule, only to die from the convulsions of lead poisoning. They are either born prematurely or die within the first year." And finally, let me instance the case of Harriet A. Walker, a young girl of 17, killed while leading a forlorn hope on the industrial battlefield. She was employed as an enamelled ware brusher, wherein lead poisoning is encountered. Her father and brother were both out of employment. She concealed her illness, walked 6 miles a day to and from work, earned her 7 or 8 shillings per week, and died at 17. Depression in trade also plays an important part in hurling the workers into the abyss. With a week's wages between a family and pauperism, a month's enforced idleness means hardship and misery almost indescribable, and from the ravages of which the victims do not always recover when work is to be had again. Just now, the daily papers contain the report of a meeting of the Carlisle branch of the Dockers Union, wherein it is stated that many of the men, for months past, have not averaged a weekly income of more than $1 to $1.25. The stagnated state of the shipping industry in the Port of London is held accountable for this condition of affairs. To the young working man or working woman or married couple, there is no assurance of happy or healthy middle life, nor of solvent old age. Work as they will, they cannot make their future secure. It is all a matter of chance. Everything depends upon the thing happening, the thing with which they have nothing to do. Precaution cannot fend it off, nor can wiles evade it. If they remain on the industrial battlefield, they must face it and take their chance against heavy odds. Of course, if they are favourably made and are not tied by kinship duties, they may run away from the industrial battlefield. In which event, the safest thing the man can do is join the army, and for the woman, possibly, to become a Red Cross nurse or go into a nunnery. In either case, they must forego home and children and all that makes life worth living, and old age other than a nightmare.